Joe Biden, auto pen scandal, people. What's amazing is how, if you don't pay attention to it, you don't see how the persuasion starts. Because if you didn't think that the fake news legacy media knew about this in advance and knew that it was coming and was thus priming the general population who's still reliant on the propaganda media for that persuasion, I will highlight how they do it and you will see it happening the next time before it happens. Yahoo News, this is from NBC News, so they all syndicate their propaganda garbage. Note the date, May 21st, 2025, 2 days before my 46th birthday. And look at the framing of the header. House Republicans to zero in on auto pen use as part of investigation into Biden's health. It's not that the scandal is the use of the auto pen and or whether or not it was being used and abused fraudulently without the demented president's knowledge himself. And understand the distinction here. Not that he was doing it, but he didn't know what he was doing. That it was being done and he didn't know that it was being done, despite his advanced dementia, which they're now trying to pass off as cancer. And I don't believe it for a heartbeat. And it's like one of those things like the House Republicans are pouncing on this story. The House Republicans are going to zero in on the auto pen use as part of their unfair investigation into Biden's health, which we are now admitting was in rapid decline. And I'm calling it now. It might be that he actually does have the cancer anyhow, and that he didn't take the medication, as Dr. Drew was explaining, because some of the treatments, it's called something suppressors, androgen suppressors. They cause dementia or they exacerbate dementia. And it might be that back in the day when he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, he already had some form of advanced dementia, and they said the treatment's going to exacerbate the dementia, so let's let it go untreated, which is why it got so aggressive. I wouldn't be surprised if in a year or two we find out, oh yeah, the cancer wasn't as bad as we thought it was actually just advanced dementia. But let's get there. They're getting ahead of the curve, people. As House Republicans prepare to investigate former President Joe Biden's health and mental fitness while in office, well, you got a best-selling, I don't know if it's best-selling, but you got Jake Tapper and now I forget the other author's book on this. You got the cover-up being admitted in real time now. They are increasingly zeroing in on his use of a so-called auto pen to sign certain pieces of legislation and executive orders. Auto pens have been widely used in the White House to generate signatures for decades. They go back, I want to say, not Eric Adams, Madison. They go back to one of the early, like 1800s, and I forget which president it was, but said it's like the greatest invention ever because it traces out the signature. You might have a tremble and you might lose your signature. You might not be physically present to do it, in which case it's a good tool to have. They've been around for a while. The question here is not how Biden used it, whether or not he was mentally fit when he was using it, but who the hell was using it without his knowledge. They've been widely used for signatures, for Barack Obama, the first president to use it to sign legislation. But congressional Republicans, who are largely taking their cues from President Donald Trump, see the use of auto pens as a key line of attack as they reopen a probe into Biden's mental acuity and his ability to do his job as president. Quote, "We're focused on the auto pen," House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comey told CBC News. Who was making the decisions? Who was authorizing his signature? Was it him? You'll notice here that the question is not necessarily the mental acuity. The question is who was operating that pen, and were they operating it with or without his demented knowledge? There's no official record of how often Biden used an auto pen for official government business. The Conservative Heritage Foundation released a study accusing the administration of using an auto pen extensively, largely based on the timing of when Biden signed documents to when he was traveling. That's a pretty good indication of whether or not he was there when his auto pen was being used. Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel issued a memo on the topic in 2005 that concluded that the practice was legal. A federal appeals court ruled as recently as 2024 that the, quote, absence of a writing does not equate to proof that a commutation did not occur when it relates to the use of a presidential auto pen. A former Biden White House official pushed back against Comer's assertion and defended the former president's use auto pen use. Quote, any accusation that Biden was not making decisions is false. Well, he might have been making decisions. Was he making the decision that we're talking about? He made a decision. He wiped his bum after he went, did a little potty. Did he make the decision to use the auto pen for the Green Deal climate stuff? Maybe not. Maybe he didn't even know that it was happening because a bunch of staffers were doing it behind his back. President Biden made the decision about the pardons and executive orders he issued and the legislation he signed into law. The former official, who was not authorized to speak on Biden's behalf, told NBC News, quote, "It is a well-established legal practice of the auto pen for signature. Made the decision. The clerical mechanism was sometimes used during his administration as it was during other going back." Okay, fine. We can skip the rest of this because really not the important part. The important part comes to what was actually going on with respect to the pen potentially being used when he wasn't there and when he didn't know. So you saw they're framing it. The Republicans are waiting to pounce and waiting to highlight the use of the auto pen, to question whether or not it was valid, legitimate. Nothing to do with his mental acuity. Whether or not he even knew what the hell was going on. Now, I will not be partial bias, and I will argue exactly as I would have had this been the other way around. Watchdog finds, quote, "no evidence Biden knew of crucial climate executive orders, demands answers on who signed them." The finding no evidence that someone knew something is trying to prove a negative. I appreciate that they could find evidence that he did know, like, here's an email, we're using the auto pen to sign this. Here's a text message, we're using the auto pen to sign this. So they're going to say, we found no evidence Biden knew of crucial climate egos. It's a very difficult thing to prove that he knew that the pen was being used above and beyond the only forms of evidence that we can possibly think of. That being said, there's some serious smoke here. First on Fox, a pro-energy group is renewing its call for an investigation into over half of a dozen Biden administration executive actions related to climate that it believes should be deemed null and void due to them being signed by an auto pen without any public comment from former President Joe Biden confirming his knowledge of them. Let's just assume that he made no public comment. There's no internal record of the use of the pen. It's known that he wasn't even there when it was done. And there's no text message, email, formal document, formal notice advising the president or acknowledging that the president's knowledge of the use of the auto pen for these exists. Yeah, I mean, you could argue there's something of a reversal of a presumption going on there. Power the Future, a nonprofit organization that advocates for American energy jobs, reviewed 8 Biden executive orders that it says were significant shifts in domestic energy policy and said it found no evidence of the president speaking about any of them publicly, raising concerns that the orders were signed by AutoPen and that he was not aware of them. Quote, "These are not obscure bureaucratic memos. These were foundational shifts in American energy policy, yet not once did Joe Biden speak about them publicly," Daniel Turner, founder of the executive director of Power the Future, told Fox News. The executive orders reviewed by the Power the Future include Arctic drilling ban in 2023, a 2021 executive order committing the federal government to net zero emissions by 2050. Only of the federal government. It's not quite as bad as trying to do it to the whole country. An executive order mandating, quote, clean energy and, quote, AI centers, and an offshore drilling ban executive order shortly before leaving office in 2025. Finding no evidence of Biden publicly speaking about the executive orders on climate, Power the Future sent letters this week to the DOJ, EPA, DOI, Department of Energy, along with House and Senate oversight committees calling for an investigation to determine who made the decisions, drafted the executive orders, and ultimately signed them. Quote, "In light of the growing evidence that actions purportedly taken by the former president may not have been approved or signed by him, but instead promulgated by a small coterie of advisors in his name without his knowledge or his signature using an auto pen, the need for congressional access to information has grown in importance with these revelations," the letter to the GOP oversight chair, James Comer, states. We could probably stop it there also because the rest of it's just going to be more of the same. What we are going to get to, by the way, sooner than later, it's going to be, it wasn't happening. He knew damn well what was going on. But even if he didn't, you elected an administration and not an individual. And understand that that is where they want to go with this one way or the other. The they being the administrative state, the powers that want to convert the presidency into a parliamentary system. You're not electing a president with executive powers, executive function. You're electing an administration. And so the administration can do no wrong once the president is elected. And whether or not he knew what his administration was doing, it's nonetheless valid and binding acts of the administration. It's going to get there. First, they're going to try to say he knew about it, he defended, he promoted it. Here's some correspondence confirming that he knew what was going on internally. He didn't talk about it publicly, whatever. And then after that, it's going to say, well, subsidiarily, but without prejudice to the foregoing, you elected a president and his administration, and the acts of his administration are what you elected as well. And therefore, even if the president wasn't there, even if they did it without his specific consent or knowledge, it's part of what you elected, and live with it. I don't mind seeing these things challenged, not on the basis that when he signed it or when he authorized the auto pen, he was not mentally all there, because that is the double-edged sword that they will use to go after Trump later on. When he pardoned the Jan 6ers, he wasn't all there. He didn't know what he was doing. He was unfit to contract because of whatever. That being said, if they can prove that the president didn't even know that the auto pen was being used, it's a far different argument. You're not attacking the acuity of the brain of the man doing it at the time. You're basically saying there was fraudulent use of this by staffers and the administration, and therefore it is null and void. And therefore people do need to go to jail because this is fraudulent appropriation of executive powers. And you want to talk about a constitutional crisis? That might be a constitutional crisis. The bottom line, Biden is a demented old buffoon. He was never in power. He was the absentee president, and that's why they propped him up for as long as they could, so that his administration, the deep state war horse who wanted war in Ukraine, war in Russia, pushed that as long as they could so they can launder and steal from 200 billion taxpayer dollars, so they can then go push his climate crisis, whatever, net zero by 2050. You will own nothing and you will be happy about it. And I would dare say challenge them and make it, set the precedent that so long as the president knows the auto pen is being used, then you can't question it. That would be a decent precedent, because it would open the door to the fact that if the president doesn't know the auto pen is being used, then those acts become challengeable. Not necessarily null and void, but they can be challenged. And the precedent should be that the auto pen should be used with the president's knowledge, and the president should know when the auto pen is being used.